I was lying on the roof of my car watching the stars. It was a clear, moonless night in central New South Wales, and I could see more stars than I'd ever seen before in my life. I became aware that I was seeing further into space than I'd ever seen before. In fact, I was looking back further in time than I'd ever seen before. As I lay on the roof of the car, there was nothing in my peripheral vision, and I felt enveloped in this bright darkness of this night sky. I became suddenly aware of the unfathomable infinity of the universe and of the bigness of the God who created it. That experience, nearly 30 years ago, is what I would still describe as being a peak or mystical experience. And those experiences are not as uncommon or as fantastical as the name mystical might lead us to believe. I think many people have such mystical experiences, but you often don't have the language to recognize them or to describe them. We might simply say or hear someone say, "I think I just had a moment." And there's often much in that moment given by God. The category of mystical experience is one I think we can use to describe the transfiguration of Jesus, which we hear in this weekend's gospel. So I'd like to try to look at the experience of the disciples' experience of Jesus' transfiguration through the lens of the 4 hallmarks of a mystical experience. So the first hallmark is ineffability, which means unexplainability. That these experiences are always something beyond what we can ever quite grasp or describe. Look at the language we have in the Gospels, where we hear that Jesus was whiter. He bleached whiter than any earthly bleach could make him. And that there was suddenly a voice heard from heaven, that Moses and Elijah appeared and then disappeared. It's clearly very imprecise language, trying to grasp, describing something completely remarkable that no words could ever fully explain. This is often the case with such mystical experiences. It doesn't make them, though, any more or less real. But I think that's why we often don't hear people speak of them, because often they are impossible to put into words. The second hallmark of a mystical experience is transience. These things don't last long. They are temporary, sometimes even just a few seconds. I don't know how long I spent on the roof of the car that night, but it may just have been like less than a minute. But a whole lot seemed to well up within me as time and space just seemed to melt together, and it felt like an infinity. We know too for the disciples on the mountaintop with Jesus that they wanted to stay there. They said, "Master, let's make tents," meaning let's pitch tents here, meant to stay there. But of course they looked around and all of a sudden Moses and Elijah were gone. It was over in a flash. Transience is often a hallmark of these genuine religious mystical experiences. The third hallmark is what's called a noetic quality, meaning an intellectual quality, that there is something given. If this is of God, God is giving, God is communicating something. It's not just a trance where we blank out into nothingness. For me, all those years ago, it was something about the bigness of the universe and the bigness of God that was a whole new revelation to me that I'd never quite grasped in the same way. For the disciples, it was a glimpse of Jesus' glory. We often talk about Jesus' divinity being veiled within his humanity, but here in this moment, the veil was off. The disciples saw something of who Jesus truly is in his divinity. The voice of the Father speaks, naming Jesus as his Son, so we hear Jesus' true identity revealed, and we hear of Moses and Elijah, the 2 great Old Testament figures of the law and the prophets, indicating that Jesus was both their equal and, of course, their greater. But Jesus was both the fulfiller of the law and the fulfiller of the prophets. So there's something given, some content. There's always given in these mystical experiences. That's often the revelation. We often hear some of our great saints describe that God showed them or spoke to them. It can sometimes be in this way. And the final hallmark of a true mystical experience is passivity. We can't make these things happen. We can't expect or somehow manufacture a religious experience because it's given by God. It's a gift of God. It's the very opposite of the story of Genesis of the Tower of Babel, where humans tried to build a tower to climb up to grasp God. No, God is the one who gives to us at the right time that God chooses. And so the disciples were led by Jesus up the mountain. They didn't make Jesus go up the mountain. Jesus invited them and led them. And there they experienced this incredible transfiguration of Jesus. And again, just for a moment, but it was them receiving this revelation that God was giving, and then they had to go back down the mountain and try to live it out. And what we know, of course, is that the disciples received this beautiful experience, which must have confirmed for them the truth of who Jesus was, that allowed them to go all the way with him to Jerusalem. The hostility against Jesus increased the further he went towards Jerusalem, so it must have gotten harder and harder. So I expect that God gave them this experience to help motivate them and keep them going, and so it is for us too. That these mystical experiences are never an end in themselves, and they are not to be sought after. Some of the great saints like John of the Cross tell us not to seek after them because we can sometimes be deceived. But what they do often give to us is confirmation and motivation to keep on going. So when we experience hardships and dry periods in our prayer, we can look back to the last time when God came near in this way, and it can give us the energy and the grace to keep on going. We can't manufacture these experiences. We can't make God come to us. But we can, however, make ourselves disposed and available for God to do this. If we are always busy, always distracted, always have headphones in our ears or a screen in front of our eyes, it's very unlikely we'll ever notice what God is doing. But if we take the time to be still, to let our defenses down, and that might be like me looking at the stars, you might be watching a sunset or an ocean, watching birds fly overhead. It might be listening to beautiful music or gazing at a piece of art. It might be gazing into the face and the eyes of a young baby. It might be a more concretely, intentionally religious experience of taking time in prayer. Coming into this beautiful empty church, which is open from about 7 in the morning, usually to 8 or 9 at night. We're also making a special time on Monday night here at OLHC and on Friday nights at St Gerard's, a special time of adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. It could be there, giving ourselves over to a time of stillness and quiet with God. Or it could be by going on retreat, taking a weekend, or even just a day on retreat to a place of prayer such as a monastery. And I'm going to put some links in the description below to show you some of the wonderful monasteries and retreat houses we have access to. I invite you to find your still place where God can invite you, where you can be still, let your defenses down, so perhaps like the disciples, we might too glimpse Jesus' glory and who he truly is as we journey with him to the cross at Easter and see him in his resurrection.